back on the 0 Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. To the joy of some and the consternation of others, social media platforms have cracked down hard on Donald Trump and the far right. Have they had a sudden moment of clarity about their role in their negative influence on the social order? Perhaps, or perhaps there are other forces at work. My next guest recently wrote an article about what those forces might be. Ryan Grim is Washington bureau chief for The Intercept. He is also the author of at least 2 books that I know of, the latest of which is We've Got People, which if you haven't read it, you really should. And he had a piece out the other day in The Intercept headlined, "Behind Big Tech's Crackdown on the Right is a Fight Over Biden Antitrust Policy." So first of all, Ryan Grim, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me here, RJ.
Always a pleasure. So the headline there is kind of a giveaway. You're telling us that this moment of clarity I described in the interview seems to have happened. I guess it was Jennifer Palmieri who you quote, saying that, funny that they had this insight about what they ought to do the day that what happened?
Well, it was interesting. 2 things happened on January 6th. What are starting to become referred to as the events of January 6th, the storming of the Capitol, but something of political electoral moment also happened, and that was Jon Ossoff being declared officially the winner of the previous night's runoff. He joined, of course, Raphael Warnock, who beat Kelly Loeffler. So Ossoff gave them 50 with Kamala Harris gives you control of the Senate. So all of a sudden, the political system went from the type that business prefers, which is divided government. And sometimes the business actually prefers divided government with Democrats in the White House because you get more competence, because Democrats actually appreciate what it means to govern. Now, not all Democrats fall under that rubric, Andrew Cuomo being the most obvious example. But if you look historically, Democrats have been more competent managers of the system than Republicans. Republicans leave the system in tatters, very not infrequently, whether it's Reagan and Bush, George W. Bush, or Donald Trump. You have these spectacular crises towards the ends of their administration that are the result of just completely taking their hands off the wheels. That, though, wasn't what business realized it was going to get. What they were going to get instead was full Democratic control of the government, and they were going to get, they realized, a much weakened opposition as it became apparent that a large faction of the Republican Party had completely lost its mind, had killed a Capitol police officer, had crashed into the United States Capitol, and had taken it over for several hours. And so Palmieri's point was, look, it's great that big tech is finally cracking down on some of these accounts, but don't be fooled. The reason they're doing it is they're trying to curry favor with Democrats now that Democrats are in power. And I think so people should consider whether or not they want to reward big tech for this kind of last minute sucking up.
It's such an interesting way to look at this, and I think so self-evidently true. And I like your analogy about the managers. It's kind of like if the Democrats run the executive branch, well, they're the bus drivers, and they're good bus drivers. Right. But if they control both houses of Congress, they're the bus drivers, and they determine the bus route. And so you've got now big tech saying, well, we don't just have competent bus drivers. I'm not sure these people are going to take us where we want to go. So we better show them what they've been asking for 4 years now, which is some sort of break on the outlandish claim made by Trump and by his followers. And so all of a sudden, and on top of that, this devastating events of on Capitol Hill. So it was kind of we better at least look like we're cleaning things up. So before we get into some of the specifics of that, either before or since your piece was published, Ryan, is there any indication that it's met with a favorable response among Democrats in Washington?
I mean, certainly, everybody from AOC to the center has been within the party has kind of been applauding the moves by Apple to kick Parler off of its App Store, Amazon Web Services to stop hosting Parler, Google to stop hosting it. They've applauded Twitter banning some 80,000 QAnon affiliated accounts. But here's where you get into interesting territory, because not only is it in the interests of big tech to suck up to Democrats at this moment, while the Trump administration launched an antitrust enforcement lawsuit against Google, but it is also in their interest to have people believe that the real problem with the internet is some bad apples. And if you pull the bad apples out, if you pull out these 80,000 QAnon people and you suspend their accounts, if you suspend the president's violence inciting account, if you completely squash this bad social network called Parler, then it's going to be good again, because now you just have the good accounts who are saying good things. And what that does is it sidesteps the whole question of these social media giants' business model. And that business model is to heighten engagement by radicalizing people and pitting extremes against each other. Zuckerberg has, with a chart, has explained this quite effectively. He tries to, draw the policy line of what's allowed and what's not allowed, at its kind of high mark. The more that you can feed people's anger and pit people against each other, the more they're going to engage. That is the central element of their algorithmically driven business model. And they don't want that to be talked about. What they want is to say, well, there's some bad people who said bad things, and so we're going to take out those bad people, and then it's going to be fine. But the system that they have created constantly produces more and more and more bad people. The idea that Google, which owns YouTube, which is radicalizing an entire, multiple generations of people as they feed them crazier and crazier video after video, the idea that they have some concern about the radicalizing influence of Parler is completely absurd. They get to tick a bunch of boxes at once. They get to knock out a competitor that they don't control. They get to flatter Democrats and do a thing that Democrats have been calling them to do, and they get to move the conversation away from their business model and toward the idea that all you have to that they're going to take care of this. They're going to moderate it better. Don't worry. They've got this. No need to break us up.
Right. That's an excellent summary, Ryan Grimm. And there's yet a third piece to this, and it's fascinating to me because all these issues interact and conflict in very interesting ways, especially for people who might be politically progressive. Because the third piece of it, of course, is the monopoly status that these corporations enjoy. So on the one hand, you have a business model built, as you described, on inflaming conflict and essentially radicalizing people against each other. You have the pernicious influence of certain, radical elements like the Parler crowd. And then, as you alluded to, but you have the monopoly question. And to me, as I observe for example, the reaction of some Democratic pundits as well as Democratic Party members, you would think, and in many ways, they may be inclined towards a vaguely anti-monopolistic view of the world, which is, I would encourage them to become more forceful about. But on the other hand, they're exulting in the elimination of the voice of Donald Trump and others from social media, which one could argue could not be done were there not monopolization. So you have this interaction of issues, and I'm not sure that either the progressive movement within the Democratic Party or the party itself has a clearly articulated vision of any kind of what kind of world it would like to see for digital media. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and not only do they not have a clearly articulated vision, they have a completely incoherent vision at this point. For the entire history of the internet, the kind of left-wing position has been that you support net neutrality. We had there were days of protest that led by Wikipedia and others where it was uncontroversially asserted by a broad spectrum of the left, from leftists to progressives to liberals across the board, that telecoms should not be throttling websites, that the internet needs to be free. That's what net neutrality meant. Net neutrality is fundamentally incompatible with the calls that Democrats have been making recently. And so, but I don't even know that's why I say it's incoherent, because I don't even think that if you went to these Democrats and said, so you oppose net neutrality, huh? They would say, no, I don't oppose net neutrality, because net neutrality is such a core value in the internet era for Democrats and for progressives to hold, that they would never admit that they don't support net neutrality. But then if you said, well, you can't support net neutrality and then also ask a web service firm to shut down a site for political purposes, that is the very antithesis of net neutrality. That is absolutely not neutrality. You can try to say that maybe net neutrality is a complicated concept, but neutrality isn't. We all know what neutrality is, and it just means neutrality. Net neutrality is neutrality on the internet. And so look, if progressives, if liberals, if Democrats don't support net neutrality anymore, then they should come out and say that. And then they should articulate a new set of principles that govern an appropriate internet. But they haven't yet. So
I love
that's why.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in, but I love that you said that, Ryan Grimm, and for a couple reasons, including, I would argue there's another fundamental principle that they haven't articulated a clear position on, and that's freedom of speech, which is the question does need to be raised at some point. Do you support the notion of a world where 2 or 3 corporations can erase a person's voice from the public sphere? Because on some level, that's what we're talking about. We've had incidents where Google search engines and other media have not only suppressed voices of the far right, but far left as well, a Counterpunch or whomever. And we've had not eliminated them, to be clear, but, suppressed their search results. And they may be people that, aggravate a lot of fellow leftists or whatever. It doesn't matter. The fact is that power exists. And if you think it's okay to eliminate the president of the United States from, obviously he has other channels, he can hold a press conference, but if you think it's okay to take some people entirely offline to all intents and purposes, when it comes to social media, where does that end? And why are you so sure, as a progressive, as a Democrat, as a liberal, however you describe yourself, not you, Ryan Grimm, but the people taking this position, how do you ensure that you're not going to be next, when it comes to freedom of speech? Do you agree that there's a freedom of speech question here?
There is, right. And people can try to get pedantic and say that speech doesn't, these speech rights don't apply because these are private platforms or whatever. But they're not being serious. Like you're not engaging seriously with the world as it is. If that's your suggestion, if there are certain platforms on which you have to be present in order to participate in the public debates of the time, then being banned from them or having your speech restricted on them, is a speech issue. It's not enough to say, well, you can go outside on your front steps and you can still scream, or you can put posters up on telephone poles, or it used to be, if you don't like it, you can start your own social network.
Right.
Well, that happened.
And they shut it down, right?
And they shut the social network down. Now, you can certainly talk about how, what appropriate moderation is, and what incitement to violence is, and restrict that. Look, free speech doesn't mean that absolutely anything goes. That's never been what it meant. But all of this is a smokescreen to avoid talking about the fact that Google, through YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and other big tech monopolies, their business model is to inflame people, and that's how they make their money. And so everybody kind of throwing their hands up and saying that this is such a complicated issue, can start with the fact that they're making money by spreading lies. Now, doesn't mean we want them fact checking. Doesn't mean that we want big tech to be the ones that are out there fact checking. But what we also don't want them to do is to be actively profiting and promoting off of the spreading of lies, because what they have determined, their algorithms have, these are smart people. What their algorithms have determined is that the most, flagrantly nonsensical lies are the things that traffic the most and the fastest. And so their algorithm therefore encourages that. So don't do that. Don't just, it's as simple as that. You're always going to have problems beyond that, but you first have to deal with the most obvious one, and then you can sort through kind of the thornier issues of safety and speech, etc. But first, stop allowing these companies to make money by actively and energetically spreading lies and anger.
And Ryan, I was locked out of my own quote unquote blue check Twitter account for 8 months. And literally within 24 hours of getting it back, I found my blood boiling, and I was like, and writing this F this guy tweet about Brick humor or somebody. And I thought, okay, I understand this intellectually, but now I get it viscerally because of the enforced exile I went through, just how pernicious it is. And I mean, look, I wrote a piece in 2014 saying they should be regulated as public utilities, I'd say, but that's not likely to happen anytime soon. So we're in a policy universe where all this is presumably going to be addressed by the new Congress and by the Biden administration. And to that end, in terms of the Biden administration, your piece also talked about a potential appointment that could have a lot of bearing on this. So what was that?
Right. So, there's FTC chair, which I didn't get into much in my piece, which will be critical. But then there's also the assistant attorney general for the antitrust division, and so the Obama administration considered filing suit against Google for unfair trade practices, and attorneys within the FTC and the Obama administration, staff attorneys, recommended that they do so. The FTC overruled them. The FTC then accidentally released the staff recommendation to the Wall Street Journal as part of an open records request. Whoops. So that's how we know for sure that the staff attorneys had found that Google was engaging in these anti-competitive practices. The Trump administration actually has been pretty good on antitrust. Now, they didn't move fast enough because Donald Trump isn't serious about anything that he does. But people that were in place during the Trump administration took antitrust and monopoly very seriously, and they actually did finally file suit. against Google, and it's considered to be the first of several. Wouldn't say many, because there aren't many of these companies. We know who these companies are, and so the Biden administration will have no choice but to continue this Google lawsuit. But the question then becomes: do they file additional suits against the other big players, and how aggressively do they pursue Google, or do they let them off with some type of an easy settlement that doesn't really change their business practices at all? And so, like with every Biden appointment, there are kind of three different folks in the mix. One is in the lead is Terrell McSweeney, who is people consider kind of okay but not great, a Biden loyalist. She had been on the FTC when it was underperforming, to put it nicely. People hope that she, like a lot of other Obama era people, have learned from their mistakes and their reticence to enforce antitrust laws in the past, and will be tougher now, saying that, look, we're now 4 or 5 years removed from these bad decisions, and the concentration and the effects of that are now so obvious you can't ignore them. Then there's Susan Davies, who is kind of the prototypical kind of corporate friendly pick that the Biden transition team kind of always floats out there, and usually doesn't pick to make their kind of okay but not great pick look a little better. And then there's Jonathan Cantor, who represents a lot of the companies that have been going after Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and has really been the intellectual architect in a lot of ways of the new kind of anti-monopoly strategies that are now being deployed. That's kind of the hope of progressives. It's not out of the question. There's some question as to whether McSweeney actually wants the job due to some personal tragedy recently in her life, and so it's possible that she goes into the administration in a different role, in which case then progressives will really, and anti-monopoly folks will really be pushing for Jonathan Cantor, which would send a huge signal from the Biden administration to big tech that they're very serious about these prosecutions. Going with somebody like Davies or somebody else who is in that camp would send the opposite signal that, hey, thank you for banning Parler. Well, let's see if we can figure out this unpleasant business of this antitrust lawsuit that was filed by this nasty administration.
Right. I'll send my man around to speak with your man, and we'll sort it out, to quote J.P. Morgan. I guess, it used to be uncontroversial, especially among Democrats, to take a reasonably robust anti-monopoly position. And it used to be, in fact, in Washington in general, 30 years ago, I don't think you'd find an administration of either party who wouldn't look at the current concentration of revenue and in this industry and say something needs to be done. But there was a time, I know Barack Obama was considered quite close to the tech industry. I know that Joe Biden and the Democrats in general have had growing financial and political support from Wall Street. But it seems to me in the past 4 years, and I'm really interested in your take on this, Ryan, it seems to me that the tech industry, which came up with a kind of hipster vibe about it and was just naturally assumed to be liberal and democratic, embraced Trump and the Republicans a little more fervently than people expected. And I'm wondering what kind of reverberations that may have for them politically now.
Yeah, that is interesting. That's certainly at play. And the cozying of Democrats to Silicon Valley is actually similar to how they cozied up with Wall Street in the early 1980s. When they really started engaging in their corporate PAC strategy for the first time on when they were really scaling that up. Wall Street at the time, this is pre-SNL crisis. This is when banking was pretty boring, because after the Great Depression, it had been regulated to the hilt, and you want your banking to be as boring as a utility. You want it to just send money where it ought to be, and that's it. They don't need to be. It's like if a water utility decide they're going to open a water park, and then all of a sudden nobody in town can get any water. That's not how you want it. You want the water utility tightly regulated. But no, your job is to provide water to the town. And so Democrats were in need of cash. They didn't want to take it from a lot of these different corporate interests because their organized labor bases, were in contest with some of these elements. There was no organized labor base that was in competition with Wall Street, because there wasn't like a kind of socialist or communist movement going on. So Wall Street, in a way, was the least controversial money that they could take in the early 1980s. And of course, they got addicted to that. And then Wall Street becomes a little more controversial with the S&L crisis, and then we all know the rest of the story and how that worked out. But similarly with Silicon Valley, there wasn't a lot of countervailing pressure against big tech in the beginning. A lot of the tech leaders, Steve Jobs, et cetera, were hippies, were gurus, were people who, in many cases, genuinely, wanted to see a better world. Their products weren't polluting the earth. So it's like, hey, this is win-win-win all around. And so you can understand how they would get hooked on that cash. And I think partly it's what you're talking about, where they were like, oh wait, these guys are actually, there's a lot of Trumpers in here. But also, as they have concentrated their power, it's just become so screamingly obvious that they're becoming a destructive force in the economy, in the sense that you're not seeing any innovation anymore. A new company can't come in and launch a new idea without either getting squashed or bought up and squashed. And so that puts the entire American competitiveness in this scene at risk, slows economic growth, and concentrates power in the hands of just a couple of guys, some of whom, like you said, have turns out to have disturbing politics that might not map with Steve Jobs's.
And even Steve Jobs, his products they were polluting. They are polluting the environment now, and bad working conditions in China and all that stuff.
Sure.
So they are not the intangible good guys they appear to be. And then there's the fanatical libertarianism of the tech valley. And I'll tell you, Ryan, I have a couple sources there I still talk to from time to time, and the views of some of these very powerful tech executives, as I'm sure you know, are very disturbing in private, even more so than in public. So we've got this drama about to play out before us as a new administration comes into power. And we've got, I feel a lot of uncertainty about how the Democrats are going to play this one. So what should be, I guess I would conclude with this. What should people be looking for besides the appointment of this assistant attorney general and I guess FTC head? What else should people be keeping their eyes and ears open for in terms of tech policy going forward, either on the Hill or from the Biden administration?
I think, look, those personnel decisions are going to be key, but go ahead. Well, then if she said no, then no. But it's also important to watch the rhetoric that's coming out of everyone from the squad to the center and the leadership of the party, to see if they're just lapping up everything that big tech is spooning out, or if they're actually going to kind of see through what they're up to.
Okay, well, we're going to be watching. I know you're going to be watching. I think this was a great analysis of what's going on. And if your kids want to come in and add anything, by the way, I definitely want to know, our children are the future. So, but if they have nothing to add.
No, they don't. Like they're headed upstairs.
Oh, okay. I'm leaving the scene of the crime. Yeah. We're all living on Zoom now, so we all know how this works. I see a shadow. Okay. Can we say hi?
You want to say hi?
Hi. Hello. Nice to meet you. Okay. Well, we'll have to leave it there. And our radio audience is not going to appreciate that as much as our video audience. So Ryan Grimm, Washington Bureau Chief for The Intercept, his latest book, as we've got People, his article on tech policy at The Intercept. I encourage you to read it. And Ryan, as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Good to talk to you, RJ.
Same here. And we'll be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.